hosted by Stan Boness.
Hi everyone, welcome. I'm Emily Lawrence and I'm joined today by my co-host Jen Knox.
Good morning, everyone. Great to be with you again today. We have two awesome colleagues on the line, Scott Butcher and Kate Allen. Both are actually directors in our strategic group, strategic growth advisory group here at Stan Boness, and bring kind of unique experiences. They've both worked and led AEC firms. Kate has an engineering degree herself. Scott's been really heavy in business development, and both now kind of leverage that expertise to guide and coach and deliver some learning and development, strategic planning for clients of SN. So really unique perspectives, and we're excited to really dive into emerging leaders in AEC for today's discussion. So I'd like to kind of pose this first to you, Kate and Scott. What are some of those challenges that you see emerging leaders really facing in today's environment?
Yeah, Jen, thanks. I would say one of the number one things that's they're concerned with is how do I get from being a technical expert to being a management expert, right? How do I do things, and then how do I get things done through others? So it's making that transition to more of a people leader instead of a project and task, get things done. And unfortunately, without specific training, you're kind of expected to learn it on your own or watch other role models and see what they might do. What do you like? What don't you like? Instead of being with intent that we actually help you make that move to kind of that emerging leader, kind of that management role. So I think that's a big challenge that they're facing today. And that's a lot of soft skills, which are now called power skills, right? So that to me is one of the biggest challenges, because the lack of engagement in our firms that Gallup tends to talk about a lot is really most offset by that direct management interaction between the team members and the team leaders, the group leaders, the project managers, those kinds of things.
You know, it's interesting. And we've all four worked in the environment within AEC firms, and the motto is pretty basic, and it's been around for decades. You're hired. You learn to become, let's say it's an engineering firm. You become an engineer. You get good at engineering. Maybe you're named a lead engineer. You're a good lead engineer. Let's make you a department manager, or maybe we'll make you a project manager, or maybe both because you don't have enough on your plate. Oh, you're good at being a project manager and a department manager. Let's promote you into company leadership. And it's all based on the latter is about those hard skills that you utilize, in this case, in engineering, as well as you take on some of the soft skills, maybe more so as a department manager or a project manager. But firms aren't even training department managers and project managers. They're just like, oh, you're good at this, go do it. And so that infrastructure is just entirely lacking. And then you move up as an emerging leader in the firm, and what do you know about bringing in work? What do you know about managing a business? What do you know about really managing a whole team beyond the specific focus of a project? And the reality is firms are really, really struggling to provide this training, because for a lot of firms, it's not even cultural to do it. Mm-hmm. So, you know, what is the challenge faced by emerging leaders? You know, right now, they're not even being trained to move into those roles. They are being put into those roles without the proper training. It's like, go drive a car. Oh, you've never been in a car? Well, here's where the key goes. Good luck.
Mm-hmm. When I was first asked to go out and sell work, it's funny. I practice in healthcare, so there's always a golf tournament. So I was like, okay, I got to go warm up my golf game. That's how I'm going to bring in work, is I need to get out to the golf course. You know, no one told me that. I just figured that's how I'm going to be around my clients, is be on the golf course, right? But again, emerging leaders like Scott, what you're talking about is it's kind of a blend of, we need to teach people skills, but we also need to start introducing how does the business work, not just how does your practice work, but how does the business work around the practice that makes that practice successful.
Mm-hmm. And I wonder, what is the what's the reason behind that not happening? Is it because leaders are sort of like, well, I had to figure it out, and so, that's just kind of the way you learn is you just figure it out. What is
I think it's somewhat cultural in the industry because
mm-hmm.
every firm we go to, we hear the same story.
Yeah.
And I don't think it's the well, I had to go figure it out. You go figure it out. Have fun. Welcome to the party. I don't think it's that as much as they're not even thinking that way. The firm
The
leadership,
mindset.
they're so focused on running the business, keeping the doors open, getting work out the door, doing all those things, and then it's like, okay, well, I guess we need the next level of leadership. Let's promote them. Who should we promote? And it doesn't even really occur. Oh, there's lots and lots and lots of training that is required to improve your business acumen, to become a rainmaker, to bring work into the firm, to be a better leader of people, to be a better communicator. I mean, just look at projects. The number one reason that projects fail, according to research from the Project Management Institute, is communication.
Yeah.
So people who are struggling with communication on projects are now being asked to communicate to potential clients, communicate to their internal teams, the employees, and they've never been given that skill set because nobody's really thought about it.
Mm-hmm. It's almost like obviously that this should really be part of a strategic plan, right? It's when we think about the next 5 to 10 years, what are those gaps from people retiring or leadership leaving that need to be filled, right? And then what are the skill sets that need to be supplemented to get that individual to that level? And I think that's why it's so tough, is because maybe we're not thinking strategically or far enough in advance, because it takes a long time to develop some of these skills.
Right. If you're actually preparing for ownership transition, that takes about 10 years in order to find a new CEO, new senior leaders within the company. You need to start laying that groundwork super early.
Mm-hmm.
But talking about strategic planning is funny. I think most often people think about strategic planning as, what is our revenue goal? How many employees do we want to be? How much revenue do we want to drive? What kind of market expansion do we want? And that's all, we talk about that in terms of quantitative growth. But there's another component of that, and that's really that qualitative growth, right? That's really shoring up the roots of a tree, like the way that we express it. Like the quantitative is the tree and the branches, but then there's that root ball, and you have to make that really strong. And that root ball is all about making sure that we have good project managers, good project management processes, that we have people that are engaged, right? And that we've given them the tools to be engaged because they know how to do their work, they know what's expected of them. So oftentimes, strategy is also not just a place to plan for that qualitative changes that need to take place in a company, but it's also an opportunity to bring your plus one. So a lot of times strategic planning is done by senior leaders in the company. Well, those senior leaders, if they're nearing retirement, in all actuality, they're planning a company for the people behind them, right? So bringing in your plus one and actually bringing those emerging leaders to a strategic planning workshop can be significantly important because they want to have a voice in the company that you're creating, that you want them to eventually take on as privately held firms and continue on with. So I think it's super important.
And to that point, we're definitely seeing, when we're working with strategic planning clients, we are seeing a shift towards being a little more intentional. Yeah, everybody wants to grow, and firms, a lot have had no problem growing the past few years. The challenge, however, is the people. And so what's happening, even companies that are trying to bring along the emerging leaders, they're not backfilling behind them. And so you have these emerging leaders with new roles, new titles that are still doing what they've always been doing, and they can't free themselves from it. It's sort of like a chain and a ball that's pulling them down and keeping them from advancing. And so, I saw that where I worked through much of my career. There was a group of us that got hired around the same time. We advanced in the companies together, became the emerging leaders, became the firm leaders as we transitioned. And, for me, my path was a little different because I was on the business development marketing side, more business focused. On the technical side, the emerging leaders were still not only managing projects, they were still doing engineering. They were still doing design on their projects. And that was really keeping them from even having an opportunity to be a leader in the firm because they're just so focused on getting projects out the door. And so, Kate, I think what you and I have been seeing a lot of is this is happening everywhere right now, but we have new levels of burnout that are
Right.
happening in our firms like maybe we've never seen before.
Right. And that burnout is, there's a common kind of condition in the marketplace right now in our firms that we have a lot of people that say, I'm not working any overtime, right? Like I'm done. When my 40's done, I'm done, or whatever your schedule is. And we're seeing a lot of that, and we're wondering kind of what's contributing to that. And it's interesting. Gallup actually tracks stress and things like that. And so we have a lot going on for people. There's a lot going on in the hybrid work environment, right? Or if you're fully remote, or if you're back in the office, it's the pull on in the new world, let's just say the new world format that we're all trying to live through and trying to figure out. We're still very, very stressed. That stress level has not come down since COVID. It's not knowing if there's a recession ahead. It's not knowing, it's having stress at home. And one of the things that Scott and I always encourage is creating psychologically safe space so that people can bring those concerns and things into the company as well and into their leaders. So it's like, hey, I may not be on my A game today. I have a lot that happened at home this morning, or I need to stay home today because I have a lot that's going on here at home. So it's kind of like all of a sudden our homes and our business has merged, and all of that stress, I think, is contributing to burnout. So burnout is a really big topic. Scott and I worked with a very large firm. We worked with about 60 of their emerging leaders and gave them an opportunity to choose what they wanted to do breakout groups on as we were preparing for strategic planning. And literally every single group picked burnout.
Yeah.
So
I'm sure that said something to the leaders of the
right,
company. Yeah.
it does say something, and
Right.
it's an interesting situation to be in. They're not the only ones.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And
and we hear horror stories.
yeah.
So the company that had a group of employees that were willing to work overtime. It wasn't enough to get some projects out the door, so they made an offer to the employees that didn't want to work overtime. We'll pay you double time. Nobody accepted it. They said, we'll pay you triple time. Nobody accepted it. Work life is incredibly important to that demographic within the firm, and they were just unwilling whatsoever to work overtime. So who's going to do it then? The people that were already willing to work overtime, the leadership that was willing to work overtime. Now they're working even more hours. And so the burnout is accelerating. And we have to keep in mind, it is an employee's market right now in AEC. Stamble and S, we did some research a couple months ago. We found that 85% of design and construction firms identified recruiting staff members as one of the biggest challenges that they are currently facing. So yeah, we're looking at some of the economic headwinds, maybe some slowdowns for firms that are doing the horizontal, non-building construction. There's the IIJA money that's continuing to flow in for years to come. But the demographics aren't pretty because the baby boomers are retiring. There aren't enough incoming new engineers on the construction side, the skilled trades. It's been a major issue for years. There aren't enough people. And so now there aren't enough people, and your really hard workers are burning out, and they can go anywhere and work and maybe go work fewer hours for more money. And so we're seeing declining loyalty to firms across all generations. And, specific to architecture engineering, the average employee a decade ago spent 7 years with a company. It's dropped to 5.
Yeah.
So that's a 2-year drop. That is very, very significant statistically. And then on the construction side of things, it's not as extreme, but it's gone from 4.3 years of loyalty to like 3.9 years. So employees don't stick around as long as they used to. And this is a huge impact on your emerging leaders, because your leaders of tomorrow might not even be working for you tomorrow because they're so burned out today, they're out the door.
Yeah, and that's what I think is so difficult to plan for, is how do we need to invest in those emerging leaders so that that burnout and that turnover doesn't happen. So as we think of all of those challenges, right, what are the solutions then? What are some of those things that firms can actually do to lighten the load on emerging leaders to ensure they're getting the skill sets they need? What can we do there to really solve that problem?
Gosh, I'm going to point back to something I brought up a little bit earlier, that's psychologically safe space. There's a study that was done by Google that talks about the highest performing teams, and there's 5 components to it, but the number one, the one that matters the most, is that we create psychologically safe space for people. And what does that mean? What that really means is that I come to work and I'm not spending all my time trying to avoid risk or avoid embarrassment or avoid sounding stupid, right? One of the ways that I used to set this up is if I went into a meeting, I say, hey, all judgment stops at the door, all comments are welcome, and even in dumb comments, right? Because a dumb comment actually might even help someone come up with the next greatest idea. So there really is no such thing, in my opinion, as a dumb comment. I know people want to debate that with me periodically, but we're still putting words out into the space that may generate thoughts on someone else's part. But it's really where it's not, expensive for me to share my opinions, to challenge the status quo, to learn and be free to ask questions, not understand. It's really, for me, the number one thing is we've got to create safe space, and that's becoming more mainstream. You're seeing podcasts on it. You're seeing more discussion on it. It came from Amy Edmondson out of Harvard, primarily with healthcare. But it's really, we have to move away from any toxic environments. We need to make people feel cared for, that we care about their well-being, we care about their professional growth, and that we're creating an environment where they can fully engage without risk.
Mhm.
I think is an easy way to put it.
Literally, Kate, I recently had a conversation with an industry colleague of mine that had a career path in her company, an emerging leader, and she was not backfilled. So, given new responsibilities to advance in the company, become more of a firm leader, but she's still having to do everything that she did in the past. And in fact, there was some even turnover underneath her that they're like, oh, we don't need to replace him. You're good at what you do. And her comment is, but if I'm doing that, I have no chance to follow this career path that you laid out for me. And they were just kind of like, okay. And her comment to me was, I can't even bring it up again with my boss because I don't want to get slapped down again. And I'm like, you do not work in a safe space. And her comment was, yes, do you know anybody that's hiring? Because I'm about done here.
Mhm.
Yeah, unfortunately, right.
Yeah, absolutely.
So as we see sort of this younger, what would be the emerging leaders as we see them with higher turnover rates and some of that due to burning out or not safe spaces and maybe a reluctancy to grab onto higher positions for fear of exactly what you were just talking about, Scott. Like, what can firms do? I know first you have to identify emerging leaders to even get the process started, right? How do you go about identifying that?
I think you're a lot of emerging leaders, they emerge just from
Identify.
you see them at work. You see they have some natural leadership skills. You see that people follow them and people relate to them. And based on that, you start to identify, what, I could see this person having a greater role within the company. Yeah, there are assessments you can take, and Kate, maybe you want to talk a little bit about the assessments. There are tools out there that you can use, but by and large, there tends to be a gut feel, and it's a consensus gut feel typically, because when it's not a consensus, that's where challenges come within firms at the leadership level. But it's also because the person is just a peak performer. You're seeing what they're doing. They're willing to try new things, take on new responsibilities. They might be asking, what can I do next? How can I help? And they emerge as that candidate to be the emerging leader.
Yeah, I think one of the things I look for is somebody who's looking beyond getting the next project out the door to how can they engage in the business? How can they proactively want to learn and grow, right? One of the things I think that one of the skill sets that is probably most scary to most engineers or emerging leaders is finance, right? So starting to learn about finance. How does what I do on a project impact the company's performance? We all know that if we get a project out, the client's happy, et cetera, but why does it matter if I improve efficiency? Why does it matter if I get the right person on the right task so that we're paying the right price for that task? Why does it matter if I don't push for all these overhead add-ins in order to, like, hey, let's take a trip to Disneyland, or hey, let's have this big conference and everybody go, or just understanding a little bit about how what you do every day kind of impacts the overall firm performance. And I'm very interested when people start to get interested in things like that, because now it tells me they're scanning the horizon a little bit differently. They're thinking broader than just getting the next project out the door. And then something Scott said earlier, right, is that engineers, they never backfill your position, just so you know. Having been in engineering for a good part of my life, and I became a project manager, I became a team leader, I managed 30 engineers at one point that did nothing but healthcare MEP. I never got backfilled. I still was doing projects. I was still trying to, make sure that the project went out. I was still stamping drawings. I was like a mini principal, basically. But I'm still projects. I'm still selling, but most of my selling is recurring selling, right? It's not going out and thinking about new markets or thinking about new clients, those kinds of things, except for if I get the opportunity through what I'm already doing, taking care of the existing. So anyway, I think that we hardly ever backfill. That's one of the problems that we have, is we don't really open this space for people to think about how they manage people, to learn how to right size it for the right person. Like, how I might manage one person could be different than what the other person needs. And I don't even get time to think about that because I'm so busy still getting projects out the door, or getting multiple projects out the door with multiple project managers now. So that space isn't made to sit and think about people.
Yeah, so this lack of strategy, because this is corporate strategy is what we're talking about here, and utter lack of it. So if you're promoting people into new roles, new positions to create leaders, but you're not freeing them from the burden of at least some of their responsibilities, they're never going to get there. So companies need to be far more intentional about doing this. So, we know what the issue is, we know what the cure is, but for some reason the bridge between the issue and the cure tends to be a very long one, and sometimes it's too long for people to navigate. But if we're being intentional, then we're understanding the importance of doing that backfill. If we're being intentional, we are understanding the importance of the training. Give these emerging leaders the financial acumen skills they need. Give these emerging leaders the business development skills they need. Give these emerging leaders the people and communication skills that they're going to need to succeed. And it doesn't happen in a 1 hour training session. It doesn't happen in a 1 day boot camp. Yes, those are important. They are elements that contribute to the bigger picture. But the bigger picture is you learn. When you look at adult learning, lecture is a very small percentage of it. Lecture exposes you to new concepts, to new ideas, to give you takeaways and assignments to work on to help build your muscle in these areas. But you need to learn by doing. So there's an example that I personally saw earlier in my career, a tale of two emerging leaders that were becoming presidents of different companies. And one company, they went through a very detailed interview process, brought in an outside consultant, board of directors with the consultant made a decision of who that next president was going to be. That next president then spent a year of his life as a mentee to the outgoing president, and learned by doing, sat in calls, sat in meetings, sat there reviewing financial documents together. It worked out well. The other company, the president decided to retire. There wasn't a lot of planning that went into it. Literally handed the job to somebody he thought was the heir apparent, approached the board to rubber stamp what he wanted to do. There was no tutoring, there was no mentoring. It was a handshake, a change of leadership one day. That president was out the door. And within 2 years, the new president, who had been the emerging leader, who got no tutoring, no skill development, was gone from the company because he failed.
Right.
So one is intentional, one is happenstance. And there's a favorite quote of mine, you probably heard it before. I think it was Louis Pasteur. Chance favors only the prepared mind. So yeah, a prepared mind is being intentional.
Yeah.
Otherwise, chance goes off the rails because you're not ready for it.
It's like, I thought you were maybe going to say failing to plan is planning to fail. But yeah, two great quotes to say. You need to be intentional about these things.
Yeah, and I wonder, we mentioned strategy, and Kate, I think you mentioned a time frame suggested for, I think you said ownership transition is 10 years. as far as that leadership transition or succession planning goes, what's the time frame or sort of strategy to prepare for that
Yeah,
that
so
you recommend?
I should have said called it leadership transition, right? So if I'm
Leadership transition.
getting ready to bring in a new president or new key people in key positions, that if we were to lose those people, our company would take a major hit over it. It takes about 10 years, to be honest, because you also probably need to have more than one of them. You can't just pick one person and say, oh my gosh, and 7 years into it, they decided something happened health wise, or they decided to take another job, or who knows what they decided. I don't really want to run a whole company, right? So you have to have multiples of them. And you're mentoring, you're teaching them along the way, but you're doing it with intention again. And then they are also should be doing with intention is to backfill themselves. So any of those key roles, there's our talent and our staff that make sure our projects get every day. Then there's some key positions in your company that you really need to keep your eye on, that you need to start doing planning for transitions. Who's going to take over? We have a lot of retirements going on right now. And it's shocking how many people don't have anybody to backfill that retirement position. Sometimes you can't. Sometimes I worked with a company one time, a long time ago, that had all these relationships in Washington, D.C. That's really hard to repeat. And that's the founder and the owner of the company. So if there isn't a person that's been groomed beside you for at least 10 years, going to all the lobbying meetings and sitting in all the meetings in Washington, D.C., there is absolutely no way that business is going to thrive unless they move into other markets that don't require that political connection, right? And so they at that point had a choice to either close the business or get in gear and figure out what other markets you want to be in, because he was on a short ramp for retirement. And so it takes a substantial amount of time, and you have to have more than one. So, and they have to be thinking about their backfill too.
And when we're thinking about, the emerging leaders, only a small percent of emerging leaders will actually ever be a company president,
Right.
right? You lead from many different positions and roles in an organization. So part of the identification of the emerging leaders is to figure out their path and what their future role looks like. And when that's defined, then you can start to understand, okay, this is how we're going to backfill that position as this person advances. This is the training that's going to be required year 1, year 2, year 3 to get this person ready till they're taking over this specific role. Here's how the company can provide additional support. I mean, earlier the +1 was mentioned. Just bring along that next gen leader and let them watch their predecessor at work, and they can learn that skill, see it in use, ask questions afterwards. And so when we have an intentional plan in place, it takes time, it takes money, absolutely, and companies aren't even thinking that way. And so that's that big disconnect. Thank goodness for that, because Sambal Nest, when we do the interpersonal communication skills training and the leadership training and the subtle doer business development training and the strategic planning and financial acumen training, all these things. Thank you, AEC world, for not being very thoughtful and intentional, because that gives us work.
Yeah.
But the reality is that all of our firms need to be thinking about this, because we are never, ever, ever not in a state of transition at our companies. And that doesn't matter if you're a 5-person firm or a 50,000 person firm. We are always in a state of transition. So we have to make this more cultural.
Mm. I like what you said there, Scott. You're always in a state of transition, because I think that is very true. So we kind of talked through a lot of the challenges facing that emerging leader development and some of the ways you can hopefully strategize to overcome some of those challenges. We did want to end. We are nearing sort of end of time here, and we don't want to run over. But if we were to ask you, we had one question prepared, and that was you both have had a ton of leadership experience running teams, developing also in your consultant roles. If you were to take all of that experience and tell your younger self before you took on a leadership role, what you might do differently, knowing what you know now, what would you tell yourself? Your younger self.
You want to take it first, Kate?
Yeah, I'll take it. So yeah, because I think about this as an engineer, right? There's a joke out there. I don't know if you've ever seen the cartoon where an engineer is outgoing if they're looking at your shoes and not their own shoes. And I will say, as an engineer, I was very shy, very, kind of more introverted and not sure about how to talk to people and very technically minded. Luckily, I also have a psychology degree, so that helps me a little bit to at least be aware of how I need to work on that. But I was not really good at communication skills. I was very uncomfortable going to networking events. I was very uncomfortable when you put me in a place where I had to small talk with somebody or start up a conversation or, just getting comfortable with those human interactions, I think is like super important. And if I was to do it all over, and actually, as I encourage people, when you get new people in, we start the networking training right away. We don't wait until you're going out to conferences and things like that. We want you to network internally. We want you to get used to speaking to groups and participating in groups and being okay with having a voice, I guess. I wish I would have learned earlier how to have a voice, right? Because when I became time to selling, I was like, well, what do I do? What do I say? I literally have no idea. I don't know how this is done. And just to share a quick story, I was doing some consulting with a firm in Kansas one time, and this young gal asked me, she's like, I don't know how to sell. And I felt her pain because when I was supposed to sell, I was like, I don't know either. But I told her, I said, do you ever just ask your client, is there anything else coming? Is there anything else coming that we can help you with? Right? It's all about being of help. And she goes, that's selling. And I was like, that's selling. That's not rainmaking, right? But that's that is selling. And she, I put it and it put her at ease because I gave her the sentence to use in that situation, right? If somebody would have handed me a sentence that I could then launch off of, I could have had very different conversations. So that's one of those little micro moves that can have a very macro impact that talk about.
Well, and Kate, you think of it in design and construction, 80% of work typically comes from those existing clients.
Right.
That one sentence can make all the difference. So, Emily, to address your question, at first when you said it, the first thing that popped into my head was shit happens, right?
Yeah.
So, when you're a leader, change is constant. People quit that you don't expect to quit. You don't get the project you think you're going to get. You lose an important client. There's a global pandemic and everybody works from home for a year. There's always something. So you have to be agile. You have to be flexible. But then the second thing I thought was, don't sweat the small stuff because there are always 150 small things happening in any given day, and it's going to be there for you, and it's never going to go away. It's going to be 150 different things tomorrow and 150 different things the next day. So you can't let that overwhelm you or upset you. That's just part of the job of being a leader. But at the end of the day, if I were to go back in time and I would tell myself one thing about being a leader in the future, it would be learn about and embrace servant leadership because it's not about you. It's about your team. It's about your colleagues. It's about your direct reports. It's about your clients. And if you make it about you, you are a narcissist. If you make it about others and how you can help others and bring along others and be intentional with others, then you're being a servant leader. And that's the kind of leader that people want to be around. That's the kind of person that people want to work for. And so, I most people who have merged into leadership roles at one point or another had a little bit of that. Yeah, look where I am now, and lose that. That doesn't help anybody. Be a servant leader would be my advice.
Yeah, and just to follow up on that, I believe in that wholeheartedly as well. Some people kind of balk at that word servant leader, and Gallup is actually moving from boss to coach, right? So it's really learning how to be that good coach, and that good coach is the one that does care, that wants your future progress, that wants to take good care of you. It's the same concept, right? But if that servant leader doesn't sit well with you, then maybe think about being that coach, even for your clients. To be honest, as a trusted advisor, I'm coaching them. This isn't, a lot of times my clients are not when I was in engineering, my clients are the COOs and they're running a business. I'm trying to help them get this project done, right? And help them interact with their constructors and the people inside their organization. I'm still coaching if you think about it, but you're here to be of service. You're here to be of help. So that to me is, we're here to help. give you a tool in the toolbox that hopefully helps you have a successful project.
A great piece of advice I learned more than a decade ago, and I wish I remember who told it to me because I quote it all the time. But it was simple. If you can't add value to a conversation, don't have the conversation. And that just totally changes your mindset on everything. Even if it's hey, you made a mistake. That's the negative. The positive, but here's what we can learn from it. And oh, here's I made the exact same mistake when I was at the same level in my career, and so did Kate. And right, so add value to every conversation you have.
Yeah.
Great. Well, this has been such a great conversation about merging leaders today. I appreciate you both being here. We'll definitely have you back on again.
Thank you guys.
Thanks so much.